language professional. And at that point, Robert Smart.
Thanks, Rich. How's everybody doing today? You all enjoying the conference here? Great. This is number 14 for SIMA, so I can't wait for 15. That's going to be great. How many contractors in the room? Can I have your hands up, please? It looks like quite a few, huh? How about property managers? Do I have any property managers in the room? I see one hand. Oh, kinda? You're kind of a property manager? Okay. Well, the reason why I asked that question very simply is, this presentation that we're going to give today is really for both sides, both the property management side as well as the contractor side. Because we're going to talk about some language. We're going to present some language out of contracts here. We're going to ask for a little bit of audience participation today because the bottom line is, do you understand what you're reading when you read a contract? And I don't know how many people maybe made it earlier to, or not earlier, but actually it would have been yesterday, to John Allen's session. How many people were in John's session? Okay, good. That was kind of a leader to this session actually, because John covered some contractual language and the reasons behind it and the importance behind it and that sort of thing, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's get started. We're going to move on to some contract language, case number 1 right here. I'm going to read you the slide, or read you the information on the slide basically, and we're going to talk about or ask for a little bit of audience participation here today to see how you understand this language that's in here. You ever get a contract in your hands and it says service requirements? Right? Everybody gets one of those, right? You ever read one of those in detail and really understand exactly every word that you're reading? No. I see some heads. Yes, no, maybe, yeah. Okay, so here we go. Service for snow removal will be available from the first measurable snowfall on or after November 1st through April 15th of each contract year, 7 days a week. 24 hours a day, as needed and set by the guideline below. Snow removal will be provided upon a 1.5-inch accumulation of snow that occurs within a 24-hour period, and qualified personnel shall remove snow in a professional manner. Any comments? Can I get some audience participation there? What does remove mean? Take it home. What else? When does 24 hours begin and end? Okay, good. What else?
It's supposed to be available at the first amount of snow that's falling, or is it after each hand?
Okay, so are you to be available for service at the measurable snowfall or at 1.5 inches? Right, and what's a measurable snowfall, right? Yes, next. Is 24-hour monitoring required? Good. Who determines that they're qualified, right? Yeah, good one. How about anybody else? Anything else you see up there? Yes. What does professional manner entail? Good. Good. So yeah, you've hit some key points here on this, right? So here's the contractor interpretation, as you were just doing. But the contractor believes, by reading into that information that we just shared with you, that all snow must be piled up and then loaded into a truck and hauled off of the site. That's what the removal of snow means to a lot of contractors, right? Would you believe in that? Are you in agreement with that? Okay, good. So here's the big issue when it comes to that, right? If I am just bidding it for plowing and you all are bidding it for removal, your bid's going to be much higher than mine, right? And a property manager is going to experience that big separation in cost. You have to remember that this is an assumption. What is up here on the slide is an assumption based upon that language that we just read together, right? So whether I read it one way and you read it another, and we interpret it in 2 different ways, it's going to change things. It's going to change the way the contract is bid, right? Now truly, on the property management side of things, okay, they're basically expecting that plowing work to be performed 24/7 whenever it snows over a 1.5-inch snowfall. Okay? Now you brought up the great point about 1.5 or measurable, right? There you go. There's another thing too. Are we to salt underneath that 1.5-inch trigger, right? Okay? But here's the other thing. The dates were irrelevant. They said November 1st to April 15th, right? But they really meant, what if it snows in October? What if it snows in May or June, right? Right. But my point is that the property manager in this case, they didn't read into it and say, you know what, we're locking you into these dates. The dates were irrelevant, okay? Because they really expect you to maintain that property at any time that the snowfall exceeds 1.5 inches, whether it's before that date or after that date. So their perception is truly reality, right, in their minds. So let's talk about some contract language in case number 2. How about assignment and delegation? Have you ever read a line under this? Have you ever seen that in a contract? So let's read this one together. Service contractors will be absolutely prohibited from assigning this agreement or delegating or subcontracting any of the contract duties, or any right, obligation, or performance of service contractor hereunder. It being agreed that the services to be performed hereunder are personal in nature, any attempted assignment or subletting of this agreement or any delegation or subcontracting of any work or additional work without the owner's prior written consent. What the heck does all that mean? You got to do it yourself. You think? What's that? Unless you have a prior agreement. What does all that wording really say? You say you need to do it yourself. How about somebody else? Yes. Only the owner of the company, you mean only the owner of the plowing company can do the property? Because he can't delegate tasks. Okay. Not bad. Not bad. But the bottom line is, here's the contractor's interpretation of that. All work must be done strictly by contractor's employees. Okay? But how possible is this, right? Because what's the true issue? Most of us don't do everything ourselves, right? We typically would hire a subcontractor to assist us maybe in moving the snow or possibly even doing the entire lot for us. So by having that wording within an RFP, a request for a proposal, doesn't it truly limit who's going to bid it, unless you talk to the property manager and draw out further information in regards to what they're looking for? If I got something like that, I wouldn't bid it. Or, in turn, I would have to talk to the property manager. But the property management interpretation, very simply, is they just don't want it subcontracted to a second-tier party without first-party direct supervision or involvement. We all understand what that means? Is there anybody that doesn't? That's what they're expecting out of it. So the bottom line is, they won't tolerate any involvement by others. Their policy is strictly enforced, and they only want a first-party contractor, vehicles, and employees to take care of that property for them. That's what that language truly means. Now that's not so hard to get along with, as long as you know that up front when you're bidding, right? When you're putting in your proposal. And if you don't like that type of language or whatever, then ask about it, talk about it. You know, draw that information out of the property manager so that you can put a better price in or service them in a different way. So let's talk about another case, example 1. Whereas the owner desires the first-class removal of snow from and treatment of the ice at the shopping center and the areas to be cleared, as defined below, in accordance with the terms and conditions of this agreement. Comments? Does it actually say anything? I like that. That's good. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Okay. My question would be, what's first class? What does that mean? Are we hauling? There we go. Does removal mean hauling or pushing? Exactly. Treatment of what ice? Yes. Yeah, so are we doing a duty all the time is what you're saying? Or right. So you're just treating the ice and not worrying about coming back and checking, doing an ice check or looking for freeze or, thaw and refreeze, right? Well, my questions also would be, when's the work to be performed and what type of ice treatment, and does it include sidewalks or is it just a shopping center? I mean, what, you know what I mean? What details, right? Not like you said earlier, does it say anything? I like that comment, by the way. Thank you for that. So let's look at another example right here. Standards of services. The contractor shall perform all services so as to meet or exceed the following standards or requirements. Standards. That key word, standards. All services and work shall be performed in a good and workmanlike manner. How about that one? Got some comments for me on that one? Exactly. How do we know what standards are? Right? I was in a session just the other day. One of the things they said was, there are no standards for this industry. Why? We're all in different areas, right? How can you come up with a standard of how to treat a snowfall when it happens differently everywhere we go? It can be different from one side of this room to the other in the Cleveland marketplace. Yes? And the clients have different standards as well. Exactly. So my question would be, whose standards or requirements? And what's the definition of good and workmanlike? Right? Workmanlike. I don't know. So here's another one for you. All services and work shall be performed to the highest standards and requirements as is customary for the snow and ice removal and maintenance industry. What did we just say? There's no standards. What's customary, right? The way I read into this very simply, though, is they want high quality, high standard, zero tolerance, clear pavement. That's the way I read into it. And of course, the contractor interpretation very simply is, if you're paying per visit and you have all that wording into the contract, we're glad to be your contractor. We're glad to be your contractor, aren't we? Because we're going to be bidding at such a high level of service that we just hope that they have a very large checkbook. But very simply, all of that language to the property management says they expect it to be plowed and treated with no client complaints or service issues. That's their true meaning of all that contractual information and language. They truly are asking us to shoulder the risk, right? And they want us to do a guaranteed customer satisfaction #1 job. But I'm sure they don't have an open checkbook that's unlimited, right? So let's talk about the next one. Services to be performed. Contractor agrees on a full-time basis, meaning on a 24-hour basis for each and every day during the period of November 1st to April 20th, and as required for the remaining period of the agreement, to perform the following services at the shopping center in accordance with the terms and conditions of this agreement. So what do you see with that one? Yes? It's time to rent a porta potty and set up a tent. You know what? I think I need to have you come up here and do the rest of this seminar because you just took all the fun away from me. Do you have a spot for our camper, right? They said 24/7, right? And of course, we don't want to forget for the ladies, the restroom. Not that we need one, right? But isn't that what that just said? That said 24/7. They want us there all the time, right? So we're going to move in and have some fun. But truly, what they expect, very simply, is this. They expect ice watch checks. They expect us to constantly monitor the site. They don't need us there on the site 24/7, but they do want us to monitor the site. They want us to do inspections for thaw and refreeze situations. And they want it to happen very simply on an ongoing, regular basis without that open checkbook, right? But how can you supply a service like that, you know what I mean, without an abundance of cost? I don't know, for you to figure out and for you to talk with the property manager about, right? So let's take a look at another section of language. Keep the property in a clear, safe, and slip-free condition. Remove ice and snow. And service the property to bare pavement results. Words out of a paragraph within a contract provided by a property manager. Can we do it? No. Why not? If it's wet, it's slippery. Any other comments? Yes. There will be ice somewhere. Okay? What else? During a blizzard, we will not have bare pavement. Good. What else? Are we going to constantly be able to keep it clear? Exactly. I mean, the bottom line is this a realistic language in the contract? Or is it even possible? We believe not. But the property management, their interpretation very simply is they do want a zero tolerance situation. Their definition or that language within their contract stated that they want us to handle that account as a zero tolerance account. They do want ice checks 24/7. They do want you to do the inspections for thaw and refreeze. They do want a dedicated crew on site. And they want you to remove or place the snow in special areas only. That's what they're truly asking for. The bottom line is they're not going to tolerate slips and falls. They're not going to tolerate dissatisfaction of clients or people coming to their location, right? But are we able to truly give them a slip-free environment and clear to bare pavement? Can we do that? And if you have signed off on something like that, can you truly provide that for them? So let's take a look at another piece of contractual language. Be at the shopping center and areas to be cleared full-time during any snowfall as herein defined or when the weather conditions otherwise warrant. Help me out. Better bring the camper back. Okay? What else? Could be an ice storm. There you go. So my question would be, during any condition, during any snowfall, during any ice storm, right? Could be sunny out. When the weather conditions warrant, right? And full-time means what? Because in this situation, you'll need equipment on site, right, for the entire duration of a snow event, according to that language. Are you capable of doing that? Now, we had a contract years ago that I was responsible for, and we had that same type of language in the contract. And it also stated in the contract very simply that they were so strict that if somebody had to go to the bathroom, somebody had to replace that person. So if you had a driver in a truck that had to go to the bathroom, you had to have another driver on site plowing while that guy was in the bathroom. And that was stated in her contract. But the bottom line is, in such places as Erie, Pennsylvania, where Rich is from, or from where I'm from in Cleveland, Ohio, you know, this could mean that you provide a service for many days straight or many hours straight, right? And are they willing to pay for that? So bottom line is, though, again, reading into that language and talking to the property manager expects things exactly as they were listed. They want a dedicated crew on site, they want dedicated equipment on site, and they're telling us that they want full-time work with no stoppage. They truly expect you, the contractor, to be on site, be prepared and ready and working the entire time the snow is falling. So again, if you're signing a contract and signing off on language like that, are you capable of providing that service for them? So let's take a look at another piece of contractual language. The equipment used by the contractor shall be in the first-class condition and repair, meet or exceed all safety standards as may now or in the future be applicable. How about that one? What's that one telling us? What's future mean? Can't predict the future? What safety standards are we working to with the equipment that we currently have, right? What else? Sounds like a lawyer that never plowed. Do we have any attorneys in the room? But here's the contractor's interpretation of it. We're going to have some fun. We're going to have to go buy some new equipment, right, to service their account. But again, a quality contractor may not bid on this type of RFP because why? We can't afford to go out and get our equipment to a first-class condition or to a such new condition or even purchase new equipment to service this account. But the bottom line is a property manager very simply just doesn't want junk on their property. And they're hoping that good representation hopefully means good work along with good quality, right? But that language is pretty stiff, isn't it? I would think. So let's go on to another contractual language piece here. No equipment shall be stored or parked on or at the shopping center unless owner shall first consent to such in writing. Such owner consent may be withheld for any reason. Any such storage or parking shall be at the contractor's sole risk. So what's this telling us? They want your stuff parked there, but they don't want your stuff parked there. Exactly. What else do we read into that? They can tow you? Yeah.
Or if somebody gets hurt on your equipment parked on site, you're solely responsible.
Yeah, so if somebody gets hurt on our equipment, we're solely responsible. But the bottom line is, can we store our equipment or not? And that's what he said, right? They want it there, but they don't want it there. You know, are you going to give us consent to do so or not? You know, or am I building into my RFP, my bid for you, the price of hauling my equipment to the site every time it snows? The big thing, though, is questions arise, right? We need to talk to that property manager and find out what the true understanding is and what their true perception is of the language that they're putting into their contract. And in this case, they don't want this equipment stored on site. They want permission to be asked, and then they will allow you to do so. Okay? It needs to be in dedicated areas. You just can't put it anywhere you feel like. And they're not going to be responsible for that equipment. That's truly what that language in that contractual agreement means. So here's the next one. You're going to love this one. We're going to have some fun with this next slide. Safety of persons and property. Any property located on, at, or adjacent to the shopping center, whether owned by the owner, any occupant of the shopping centers, any public entity, or any party, any other party. What the heck's that say? I heard something. It's everyone. Everyone meaning what? Pardon me? It doesn't say anything?
You're in a lot of trouble if you sign that.
You're in a lot of trouble if you sign that? Why is that, though? There you go. Any adjacent properties. Yeah, but the problem with that language, very simply, right there, is it says that you're responsible for all the surrounding areas to that shopping center or to that parking lot. That could mean the people across the street, to either side, to the rear of the property, right? Within a 5-mile radius. I mean, you don't know. You have no idea. Exactly. It's a never-ending situation. The safety of what and who is what I would ask, right? So the contractor interpretation is basically what we just said, right? That you want us, as a contractor, to be liable for all these other properties that we have nothing to do with. And again, we may not bid on something like that because we're assuming a risk that is uncoverable, right? Multiple insurance policies and coverage issues are not possible through your insurance carrier for what they're asking for. And of course, we don't want to be the responsible party involved in that situation. But very simply, the property manager, after talking to the property manager and clarifying that information, simply said, they want us to be responsible for all the entities within their property. But that's not what that language said. And my question to you is, would that language, you know what I mean, if you accidentally signed it, would it hold up in court? And will you have to defend yourself? You know, John the other day in his class shared that this is a $10 billion a year industry. And more lawyers are getting involved, or attorneys are getting involved with what? Slip and fall suits, right? Why? Because it's the money. So again, if you're reading something and signing off on it and you really don't understand what it says, in that case, you could be in big trouble. So how does what you say, what you don't say or read and interpret influence the request for proposal process? How are you, the contractor, perceiving what you read? How is the management company perceiving what they read? Remember, the more questions that we ask and the more details that we get, the better off we're all going to be, right? So if the property manager or management company doesn't truly understand the specs, how are they going to be able to explain them to you or I as a professional contractor? Remember, there's many of us in the room that have learned the hard way, right? By hard knocks, the school of hard knocks. Because we don't know where the specs came from, we don't know who wrote them, what it means, and we don't and can't get the correct answers. You ever experienced that? You ever had that problem? You got to drill down through the specs, right? and gain a true understanding of what you're bidding on. By drilling down through those specs, we can help ourselves and the property managers by offering a different perspective of the language and what it truly means. Is that correct? And what happens in this business? What happens to us all the time? We talk about that apple and orange thing, right? How does the lack of clarification of the issues in the contract or the language in the contract cause an apples and oranges bid? It's because maybe myself and Bill over here, maybe we're not interpreting the language the same way, but we're bidding the same property against each other, right? So here's an answer. Remove snow. That key word, remove snow. How many times have we seen that in a contract, right? Are we hauling it? Are we really removing it? Or do they just mean push it or plow it? And that wording is going to cause a huge difference in price when a property management company puts that RFP out there for bid to everybody in this room. Because we're going to all interpret it a different way unless we make that phone call and talk to them. Same thing with the 24/7, right? We've kind of touched on that earlier, but there's a huge difference, or it's going to cause a huge difference in price if I plan on leaving somebody on site 24/7 during the entire period of the snow season, and Bill over here sends somebody there every 2 hours to check on it, right? It's going to cause a huge difference in cost and pricing. So is the RFP wording causing highly qualified contractors like ourselves or business providers or snow providers to overbid or just walk away from some of these bids? I'm sure it is, right? I know I've gotten language or gotten contracts before with language in it that I've read and I've said, forget it, and I don't even bother. I don't even want to deal with it. I'm going to give you an example of that in a little bit here. But if you want the best value for the best quality of price, right, we got to put everything into writing. Everything must be in writing, and we must understand it. Because if you do get yourself into a legal situation, guess what's coming out in court? It's going to be that writing. It's going to be that language. It's going to be that contractual agreement that you have to be able to support and be able to defend. So if the RFP is written in such a way, right, that allows us to take all the risk, would you do it? My question to you in this case, if you use the stock market like most of us do, would you buy a piece of stock that's constantly falling? And that's what you would be purchasing or buying into if you were to sign off on some of that contractual language that we just talked about. So here's the thing. It's a risky business that we're all in. It can be a win-win situation for us and the property management side, right? But we all have to truly understand what we're reading. And here's my story for you. I have we do a lot of HOA or homeowner association condominium work where we're from, okay? And the management company sends out a standard contract. Standard contract says we got to plow, we got to shovel, we got to salt, you know what I mean? We got to do all the driveways, we got to do all the sidewalks. This is what all the contractual language is in the contract. True story. All we're supposed to be plowing is a street and 2 cul-de-sacs and 2 common parking areas of about 3 cars apiece. No driveways, no sidewalks, no ice melter application, no nothing. Because it's a private street, and this particular homeowner association wants to shovel all their own sidewalks and driveways. But they need to have somebody plow the street because the city doesn't do it, right? Okay? Well, I get this contract, it comes to me, and it says we're supposed to be shoveling all the sidewalks, applying ice melter, you know what I mean, clearing all the driveways, applying ice melter on all that. I had a heyday with that contract, by the way. All I did was cross out and cross out and cross out, change language and this, that, and everything else. I sent it back to the property manager. I've never seen somebody so upset in their life, because I tore their contract to shreds, literally, with the language that was in that contract. And they wound up sending me back an entirely new contract with all the language that I wrote into it, because they were trying to catch me. If I hadn't read that contract and read all the details in that contract, and if I had signed off on that, I would have been responsible for doing all that work, right? I would have assumed that risk. So very simply, such partnerships allow us as contractors to service property properly, but not overcharge for items that might be performed, right? So if there's a disconnect between corporate expectations or the management's expectations and our services, doesn't that cause us a problem as contractors? Is it the result, or can this be a result, of misinterpreted language within our contracts? Whether it's our contract or their contract. So here's my question to you. If your contract specifically says plowing at a trigger depth of 2 inches, okay, and a manager calls you up at 1 inch and asks you to plow it, what happens? They have to pay? What else happens? You better not just go do it? Why not? Okay, so if you provide that service at a 1 inch trigger, you own that service for the rest of the year. Why? It's usual and customary because they're used to getting it at 2 inches. Is that what I'm hearing? Or they're used to getting it at 1 inch? Okay. If they call you every time, you'll go every time. I see a hand up over there. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. You establish precedent. Exactly. You have now changed the scope of work for the contract. Okay? If you do it once, you own it for life, as you stated. That's a big problem, by the way. Because in the legal side of things, in the court of law, they can prove, you know what I mean, that you were doing something that wasn't specified. But because you did it, you changed the scope of work in the contract. Yes? That's a good question. I'm not here to give you legal advice, okay? But I will tell you again, you have changed the scope of work of the contract. Good question. And if, you know, here's the thing. Are you reading and or changing the legal language within your contracts when this happens? Right? So let's just talk about a few other things. If the contractor comes back to just open an entranceway, right? Let me skip a slide here. Whoop, I flipped up too many pages. What are you paying or charging for? Are you paying or charging for a full plow, a partial plow, right? What type of language is in your contract for that situation? Or if the site level manager wants spot salting for ice patches on your specs, or if your specs call for it, then what are you paying for? You're paying for a full salting, partial salting? You see what I'm saying? What happens here? What changes? But the bottom line is, again, if something were to go to court, how is the language going to be interpreted by what? The jury, right? How are they going to read into your language? Or how are they going to read into the fact that you changed your scope of work? So let's talk about this a little further. Actual contract language. Contractor will provide slip-free environment. Another piece. Contractor shall provide all services to a level of bare pavement. It is the policy of ABC Company to have bare pavement during winter months. I know we kind of touched on these earlier, right? But the contractor shall provide a surface that is free and clear of ice and snow. So what happens? If someone slips, then did you follow those prior 3 slides in their specifications? So I ask, is this a situation or a question? But would the contractor be liable because we did not provide that slip-free environment? Or would the property manager be liable for not enforcing their own specifications? Think about that. Who's at fault here? With those 3 slides of language, and we have an incident and a slip and fall, what happens? Will the court look to hold the property manager or the contractor responsible? Can somebody help me with that? Probably both. Any other opinions? Contractor? Unless it says to hold harmless. Unless you have an indemnification clause, right? Maybe. So the correct answer is all the above. I'm actually working on a legal case with that situation right now, where the contractor puts snow in the wrong place, and the property manager is supposed to be inspecting the property. Who's at fault? I don't know. So let's look at this situation. It's 7 p.m. and the temperature outside is 36 degrees. So here's my question. Should the property be checked for ice or any liability issues? Somebody help me out there. It's 36 degrees, 7 o'clock at night. In those situations that we just read, are we supposed to be checking that property? Yes. Questions need to be asked before we can answer that. Okay, good. What's the ground temperature? Good. Is there any drainage issues? Yep.
Did they sign on for a post-storm monitoring program, or is it an expectation that we're going to be out day or night?
Good. So are we supposed to be checking post-storm day and night? Good, good. Yep. Yes, sir. Are there people at 7 o'clock at night? Well, let me ask you a question. In all seriousness, what if the fire department got called onto the property, or the police department got called onto the property because the alarm went off, right? Are you ever going to know that? So to me, you should treat every property 24/7. You see what I'm saying? Because you never know when somebody might come or go. That may help you in regards to that question. But very simply, you're right. Here's your answer. It depends on ground temperature. If in the last week we've been in the 20s and the ground temperature is still in the 20s, thus any thawing of piles can cause what? Water to refreeze on the surface, right? And I want you to think about this too. Ground temperatures on properties can vary immensely. Do you know why? Sun, shade, wind, right? Surfaces, blacktop, concrete, variable surfaces, how it's poured, what the substrate is underneath of it, right? It's going to change immensely, right? Just because it's a piece of concrete doesn't mean it's the same temperature over here as it is over here. So if the specs say 24/7, then we should be servicing that property, right? That's what it's telling us. But remember, very simply, we're going to have a boatload of money, right? And we're going to be spending a boatload of money, and the property manager or the owner of that property is going to be paying a boatload of money until what? Ground temperatures come back up again. So the real question is, are they willing to pay for that type of service? Or is the property manager going to ask us to hold off on servicing that? If the property manager is controlling the situation and we're allowing them to control the situation, then what happens again? We change our scope of work again, right? We've changed the contractual language. We've allowed them to change what our services call for and how we're going to perform them. So my question is, who's dealing the cards? Is it us or the property manager or the owner? And where does the liability fall? Who's responsible? So who is going to be responsible when the instructions or the contractual language changes? Famous saying my father told me years ago. He said, get it in writing, verbal orders don't go. Say it in writing. And earlier we talked about the fact that, should we have it in a written form? The answer is yes. If somebody's asking you to change what you're supposed to do, and they're technically changing the scope of work of your contract, get it in writing. Don't take a verbal order. Email will work because you have a trail that can be followed. Text messaging, maybe. I will tell you, sitting in John's class the other day, he brought that exact same thing up. And he said text messaging, no. I say maybe.
What I do is that property manager text me all the time. I cut and paste it, put it on email, knock it off.
There you go. There's a great idea. Cut and paste the text message, put it on email, and log it that way. That's a fantastic idea. Yeah, great idea. Great idea. So what liability does the property manager have to ensure that the written specs are being followed? Let's review some other examples now, okay? Scenario 1. The site level manager assigns an area to pile snow around the parking lot. How many times has that happened? Never, right? Nobody's ever dealt with that before, right? I could see that. But here's the key. In the court of law, an expert witness is going to ask, who decided where to pile the snow? What's the answer going to be? The site level manager, right? Especially if we have it in writing. Okay? But if it can be determined that it was the wrong place to pile the snow, then somebody will have a liability for the thaw and refreeze event, which is a situation that I'm actually dealing with right now on a case currently right now. I've got a contractor that pushed a pile of snow into a handicapped parking space on a downhill slope. I heard that. Guess what melted and refroze in a handicapped parking space? So the real question is, who's going to blame who in this situation? Where will the liability fall, or will it be a shared liability? You have to remember that as professionals, we have to advise the property manager whether they're giving us the proper instructions or not. And make sure that you document all of those communications. So here's scenario 2. You have patches of ice and your specs call for an ice-free or slip-free environment. And all parties involved in the contractual obligation will need to check the parking lot, right? Because if the property manager has signed something and we've signed something and the specs say that we're going to provide this environment, we're both responsible. So, who's truly responsible? Everybody involved in that agreement. But here's the issue. Okay? if it can be determined that there was no routine site inspections by either the client or the contractor, then this happens. It can be proven that both parties, right, had to provide that reasonable care of that situation. So now I ask you to pull your handouts out. You have a handout called Risk and Liability Property Assessment Checklist. My question to you is, when you go to a property, do you actually inspect the property? Are you looking for problems within that property that A, can cause a situation for you, the property owner, or the property management team? So let's just kind of look through this real quick, but in this case, Rich Arlington and Associates have provided us with a checklist here, and we look at it and it first says parking lots. Do we have a place to store the snow piles? How close are the visitors or employees going to park to the snow pile? Will this create a thaw-refreeze event? And will or may it create black ice liability? Do you have a way to remove or relocate those piles if the need arises? And will the piling of snow in that particular area create a vision or a hazard for ongoing traffic? Do you think about these things? Do you look at the property and start assessing the property as you're walking around the property and talking with the property manager? But what's the current state of the parking lot? Do we have potholes? Do we have depressions? Do we have cracks? Do we have wrong grading? All those things can cause what? Places for ice to form, right? Have we advised the property manager or the owner of the property that we should have these areas repaired or filled or sealed or whatever to prevent a situation? Here's a key one. Where do the downspouts run off to? True story. I go to a medical building, a brand new medical building that essentially was built within the last, say, 2 years. Okay? Every single downspout off of the roof drains out onto the sidewalk all the way around the entire building on all 4 sides of the building. Now that particular medical facility, okay, that particular medical facility, what do? Therapy and orthopedic surgery. You got it. Isn't that great? I did not. And I brought it to the lady's attention that I was dealing with. She just kind of shrugged her shoulders. She says, there's been no problem so far. The other contractors dealt with it. Okay, no problem. Right, exactly. Where and what type of roof do we have, and are there any awnings present on the property? And if so, are the gutters functionable, or do they even have any gutters that are functionable? In the case of another case that I was on, we have some overhead structure like that, some overhead awnings with no gutters around it, dripping icicles, caused ice, somebody slips and falls. Who's at fault? I'll let you figure that out. I don't know. If it's a flat roof, do we have a plan? I'm sure you probably saw Jason Case speak, right? I don't know, maybe some of you did or didn't or whatever, but imagine all the snow that they got, right? And the liability issues with all the snow they got up in Mass this year on those flat roofs. Jason was talking about how the beams were sagging 3-4 feet because of the weight on the roof. And do we have a place or a plan in place for snow removal of that situation? Do icicles occur from the roof line? And if they do, what causes the icicle, right? What happens? I'll teach you another story. This is a true story on one of my properties, okay, that we serviced this past winter. We have a sign that's on 24/7. The sign's melting the snow that's on the front of the sign. It's dripping down onto the sidewalk. I brought it to the attention of the property owner. You have an issue here. Property owner shrugs his shoulders, says, oh well. We got there one night, and I am not joking you, there was about a 16-inch tall pile of ice, and I mean solid ice across the sidewalk from where that sign had been dripping all that snow all night long. But I brought it to the attention of the property owner. I've got it documented. I'm not responsible. My wife just leased a property for a beauty salon, and I noticed that right next to her beauty salon there's a medical place that has one of those signs on 24/7, and they actually have a gutter channel directly underneath the sign that catches the drippings and runs it off. Pretty ingenious, huh? So the grounds, what's the current state of the concrete of the property? What's the current state of the turf in relation to the curbing? Does the soil come up level with the curb, or is it lower than the curb or higher than the curb? Is it going to cause a trip hazard as you're clearing those sidewalks? Do you have an outdoor smoking section, and what's the snow and ice plan for that area? What time do employees and or deliveries arrive in the morning? Remember what we talked about that 7 o'clock hour, and being closed? What time do the deliveries show up? What time does, cleaning staff show up, or maintenance staff, or whatever? What areas around the site have got shading due to the building or trees or whatever that might cause cooler temperatures and ice conditions? What is the prevailing wind direction on your site? And knowing all this information obviously is what? Going to show that you're a professional and you care about the property, right? And you're going to share this data or talk about this data and document this data with the property manager or the owner. So the people in the plan, who's responsible for the sidewalk snow and ice management? In John Allen's talk the other day, very simply, John shared the fact that they're plowing the snow, or in a legal case, excuse me, that he was on, they were plowing the snow. They couldn't plow directly up to the curb. Why? Because we have parking bumpers, and the contractor was not responsible for shoveling the snow. The restaurant or whatever it was shoveling the snow off the sidewalks out into the parking lot, so now you've got about a 3-foot gap or a 2-foot gap, whatever it is, between the parking bumpers and the parking lot itself that's what? Full of snow. The contractor in this case advised, that they should shovel pathways. They never did. Somebody slipped and fell. I don't know the outcome of the case, but the bottom line is, again, if the contractor documented that information, the contractor most probably would get out of that situation. If not, then maybe the contractor could be proven right that they should have shoveled the snow between the parking bumpers and the sidewalk to clear that area. Well, again, I can't answer all that legally, but if we send somebody an email, do we know they got it? Not necessarily, right? So I'm a believer in email, but I'm also more so a believer of what you're saying. Have somebody sign off on the situation. Yeah. Yes? That is correct. And I will tell you, I've seen that fail as well. Yeah. Because if somebody denies it, or if the returning email doesn't come back to you because it got lost in the email world, right? You have a failure. So I wouldn't put my full faith in that, is what I'm trying to say. I know what you're saying, and I totally agree, and we do that out of my office, but I don't always believe it. Yes?
If you do get a verbal dialogue with like a site manager or something, and he changes something, assuming it's a relatively small change, can you then document the date, the time, and the conversation that you had, and will that help you in any way, or
Yeah, Scott, good question. I mean, what we do in my office, we have a customer management system that's attached to my program, and we time and date stamp our conversations with people. But again, that's still, when it comes to the legal side of things and changing a contractual obligation, I want to get signed off on that. It's okay to, they called you and said, hey, you forgot a spot, or you missed a spot, or you know what I mean, or you need to come back out because it looks slippery or something. That kind of stuff we'll document, you know what I mean, with that time and date stamp. But again, if it's something that changes that scope of work that's going to put me legally in trouble, possibly legally in trouble in the future, I want somebody to sign off on it. Yes?
Might be just send an email to that property manager, say, per our conversation, David, and then ask for a reply, from a reply back from them. If they reply back and say, yes, I acknowledge it.
Yeah, exactly, and that is a signature essentially, right? And that's what I'm saying. I just wouldn't just record the information and not get authorization some way, somehow. Yes?
Okay, I know you do HOAs and you do as well. When you send an email to the property manager, situations like this, do you CC the board members as well?
No.
Do you make a practice, you do not like to do that?
No. A lot of times we don't know who the board members are.
Right.
We don't have their...
And if you have a relationship with them, do you make a practice, would you do that? Or you think you're undermining the property manager?
Well, okay, so the question is, do I CC all the board members in the case of talking with a property manager about an HOA association? I will be honest with you, out of all the HOA associations that I've dealt with over the last 30 years, I've probably had very few board members allow me to have their contact information, to be honest with you. You're dealing with a property manager, that's their job. You know what I mean? They manage that property and they report to the board, and that's generally who you're going to converse with. So let me just finish this real quick, okay? But very simply, this sheet, and I'm not going to read any more into it, but all of the items in this checklist should be looked at, okay, with the following questions in mind. Can the area be repaired? Do we have a plan to address these hazards? Is there a way to limit or restrict access to these areas? And have we addressed these areas with the responsible parties? Right? Have we truly communicated any of these issues? Now, you may find there's other issues, okay? You know, prime example for me, and I love telling this story, is truck dock chocks, right? That are on the chains, you know, and you put the plow down and you're back dragging the truck dock, you know, and they used to be on a chain, and the chain comes snapping up and goes through your windshield and causes damage to your truck, or maybe the personnel in the truck or something like that. I mean, have you addressed that with your personnel? Have you addressed that with your team? You know, so that they don't get injured, so you don't have a Bureau of Workers' Compensation or an insurance claim on your hands, right? So very simply, okay, have you done a risk analysis of the site? That's my question to you. Are you going to take this sheet, take it back with you, and start doing that risk analysis? Okay? Because there's many things that are specific to every site that can hold either us liable, the property manager liable, the owner liable, or possibly all three of us. Okay? But is the scope of work that is presented, is it the norm for the industry? When you're reading these pieces of scope of work that are coming in these RFPs, is it a normal situation? And here's the key. Here's my question to you. Are sign-off sheets required for the work that you're performing? And are you getting it checked by the recipient? So again, based upon what the language says within the contract, is the recipient inspecting the work that you have done? And if they are, or if it is their job duty to do so, are you as the contractor receiving signed sheets that they've done so? Now in the case of this legal situation that I'm dealing with right now, not for our own company, but you know, for an outside contractor, very simply is they put that snow, like I told you, in that handicapped parking spot. It thawed and refroze, and the contract specifically says that the property manager is going to inspect the property daily. So has the property manager done their job? I don't know. I don't have those reports yet, you know. But that was written into the contract. And the thing that I learned the other day, see, I've learned something new while I was here. How long do you save your information for? You save it forever? everything you've done, you've saved forever? Oh, you should save it forever. I heard 7 years. Well, I've always been a true believer, okay? And this is me talking now. I've always been a true believer that I've always saved everything for 3 years. And John Allen proved me wrong the other day when I sat in John's class. He said, save it all for 7 years. Guess what's going to change in my office when I get back on Monday? Yes, I saw a hand up.
I thought it was 5, because I know a lot of corporate paperwork is required to get 5.
Yeah, well, the statute of limitations is 2 years, and that's why I've always kept stuff for 3 years, you know. I don't know. I'm going to look into it in a little more depth and detail, you know what I mean, when I get back, but I truly believe that I will be changing, you know, how long I save this stuff for. So the real question is, how long would it truly take somebody that might be responsible to inspect every inch of a piece of service property? And what happens if they don't do it? Think about that. Are you truly inspecting all the work that you or your team or your subcontractors is doing? And is the language in your contract or what you have signed off on requiring you to do so? But what happens when we don't follow those written specifications? And who is held accountable in that situation? Remember, as we spoke about before, if the written specs are not being followed, then what happens? It creates that assumed scope of work that changes all of your company's written specifications or the information that's within the RFP. You can't set yourself up for failure, because this all works both ways. If we overservice a site, then it also creates a change in scope of work. Don't let yourself get caught up in that change. Make sure that you understand who is going to shoulder the risk of a slip and fall lawsuit or something of the sort, okay, because of how the work is being performed. So here's a little case study for you. The specs called for curb-to-curb plowing and even stated that the piles must be placed on the grass beyond the curb. Sounds pretty simple, right? Guess what? We have a problem. But the property owner fell back to the specifications that were in the contract, and they tried to hold the contractor liable, right? Because the specification strictly said over the curb onto the turf or the grass, right? But the contractor had evidence showing that the piles had been allowed in the parking lot on previous snow events, as well as even including previous years. They've got that data, right? They've got those pictures. And here's where the problem is, that the property manager site level team allowed that snow to be piled in the parking lot instead of over and past the curb. So who do you think was liable? Were we wrong? As contractors, were we wrong? Of course we were, right? But remember, this is the key. Being wrong is not necessarily liable if we had been allowed to do it in the past, right? But we have to be able to what? Document it, prove it, have pictures of it. But the big thing is very simple. Doesn't everybody try to save money? Right? We as contractors are dealing with the property managers or the owners of the property, and they're trying to cut costs and save money. So did they really save any money? Because here's the outcome of the case right here. It settled for over $100,000 and the property owners were self-insured. the contractor was not held liable. The property owner was. Imagine how that felt. So did they truly save any money? You have to remember that a lot of times corporate property managers or the owners of the properties or whatever, they look past that cost, right? So how did that decision of that site manager ultimately affect the contract and the cost to the owner? If we're under or overproducing that work to satisfy anybody, then what truly are the related costs that may come at us somewhere down the road? Situation, true situation. Years ago, had a corporate client. The specs in our contract said whatever they said. I can't remember now. It's been so long. It's probably 20 years ago. But a gentleman pulled into the parking lot with his car, slid sideways with the car. This is a true story. Smashes his car, finally parks his car, goes to get out of his car on the way into the door, or from his car, you know what I mean, to the main door entrance. He slips and falls and breaks his leg. This guy's having a bad day, right? Okay? And very simply, you know, we didn't have a zero tolerance contract or anything like that. You know, we were required to plow and to salt, you know. I don't remember exactly at what triggered depth or what the situation or language was in the contract, but the bottom line is they threatened to sue. We produced all the documentation to when we were there, what we did, and everything like that. End of story. Over. Never went any further. And again, your documentation or pictures in this case, you know what I mean, of piling the snow, you know what I mean, in the wrong place and being allowed to do so and that sort of thing got the contractor out of the situation at hand. But remember, here's the key. The average lawsuit today costs $20,000 just to defend yourself. And if you're found not guilty, now in the state of Ohio, you can't collect any fees or funds or monies that you've paid to protect yourself, you know what I mean, against a lawsuit. Where in other states, I believe you can. You can go back after the person that has sued you and try to collect your legal fees. But I just went through that about a year and a half ago. I had a situation where my ex-partner sued me for quite a bit of money and never got anything. And the bottom line is that, you know, I paid my attorney's fees and I lose. You know, it was a horrible feeling, to be honest with you. And so that's what I'm trying to tell you here. So today, customers have choices, okay? And very simply, if they can't get to a site safely, do they have a choice? Right? So here's the lesson learned, right? If they pull up to a store and the grass is 3 feet high, do you think they're going to still shop at the store? Do you think they're still going to safely arrive to the store? Right? However, right, if there's 2 feet of snow in the parking lot and they can't get to the store, where are they going to go? Possibly go to the competitor, right? We're in a dangerous and high-risk business. It does carry a lot of liability exposure, and I'm hoping that what we've shared with you today allows you to understand, to look at that whole picture and not strictly look at price or not strictly look at the fact that you want the contract. That you're going to read into the contract and you're going to understand who you're partnering with, right? Because you need to research who you're partnering with no differently than they need to research you, the contractor, and anybody else that's involved when it comes to a contractual obligation, right? You can learn a lot of networking information through the social networks, and you can come up with information that will help you and decide whether you want to work for somebody or not, right? Or vice versa, whether a property management company wants to hire ABC contractor, right? Because they can research them. So if there's a language barrier that's creating a problem, right? Is it going to cause a problem? Is it going to change the value in the product produced? Language in a contract, or what you say or what you do, can easily narrow the risk spectrum or broaden the risk spectrum, correct? Make sure that you're understanding all the language within your contractual obligation. I hope this has been helpful for you today. I appreciate you having me here today. I represent, again, Rich Arlington and Associates. We have contractor business solutions pamphlets in both the front and the rear of the room, as well as Rich and I have our cards available. If you have any need or concerns that you need to contact either myself or Rich Arlington about, we'd love to hear from you. So can I ask if there's any other questions today? Yes?
And you kind of at the end there, you were touching on like with the soul files, if they allow that to happen, and then they assume responsibility. And you started to say something about underperformance, and if they...
Well, that's an underperformance, is it not? If you're allowed to pile that...
I'm saying that's a bad performance. They broke the rules. But if say there's they did a poor job, they didn't put enough salt down, they left it icy, and the property management or the site manager didn't want to have it corrected, didn't bring it up that it was being corrected. Now is that setting precedent that it's okay for them?
Well, again, it depends what's written into the contract and what the site manager's relationship is to that contract. You know? I mean, if the site manager, you know, if it says that the site, as I said earlier, if the site manager is going to inspect the property on a daily basis to make sure that you've done your job, and they don't do that, and they don't verify that, and they don't have written documentation that they've done so, then they can be found at fault because they, you know what I mean, didn't follow through on what their contractual obligation was. And in the case of that snow pile, you know, the contract said put it over the curb, put it on the grass, but the site manager said put it in the middle of the parking lot. Well, now you've placed something in the middle of the parking lot somewhere, possibly where there's a downhill grade, right? You could possibly have a thaw, refreeze situation. And if it had been over the curb in the first place and melted, it would have melted in the grass. Hopefully, right? Unless you were piling it, again, at the top of an incline, and it, you know what I mean, it melted, came across the grass, over the curb, and then onto the parking lot, and dripped or ran down the parking lot and caused a problem that way. In John's seminar the other day, again, he showed a picture of a parking lot like this, and the guy's plowing the snow and putting it up here at the top of the parking lot. Well, you have an issue, right? And that, you know, if the property owner said, listen, I want it up here, you know what I mean, rather than down here at the street level, you know, do we have a problem? I don't know. Well, you don't know. You don't know what the situation is. I'm just sharing a nice picture that they had in their presentation. You know what I'm saying? I thought it was a unique picture because it makes sense. And my take on it is if I did put the snow at the bottom of the parking lot down here, then what happens when the thaw refreeze happens and it runs over the sidewalk into the street? You still may have an issue, right? But if you documented that information based upon our checklist that we've given you and you have them sign off on it, you're protecting yourself. Yes?
In a lot of cases with some of these international, the contractors, you got to go in and get a signature, and they never come out and look at it. They just go in, wait for the sign to leave, nobody ever inspects the work. And they're setting precedent in that case, but they're just allowing whatever to happen.
Possibly. Again, it depends on what the language is. You know, they might just have to sign off on the fact that you've been there. You see what I'm saying? They may not be signing off on the fact that you've laid 100 pounds of salt down and 300 pounds of, you know, calcium, and you've moved the snow, and you see what I'm saying? So it just depends on what the contractual obligation is. Yes?
Talk about like parking deck. You have counselors CMA. They only want CMA on there.
Yep. Calcium magnesium acetate.
But it doesn't
Calcium magnesium acetate doesn't work? Well, you know, I'm going to tell you another true story, and this might help you a little bit, but I went to do a proposal for a bank. It was Citibank, actually, and the gentleman says, I don't want any salt on my sidewalks. I says, okay, what do you want? He says, well, I want green melt. And I started to laugh. And he's like, what's so funny? He says, you got any idea what green melt is? He says, no. I says, well, I can tell you it's 99.9% salt with a little bit of green coloring on it. And yet you're telling me that you don't want salt on your sidewalks, right? What do you want? I want calcium chloride. Well, we bid it that way. We didn't get the bid. But hopefully I educated the gentleman. You see what I'm saying? And in the case of what you're talking about, they're asking for CMA on the parking deck. You know that it doesn't work below, say, 20 degrees, or you know that you have to use 5 times the amount of product, let's say, you know what I mean, to melt the same amount of snow and ice that you would in the case of using a salt or calcium or mag or whatever product. You see what I'm saying? Now you got to educate the client. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. If they absolutely want the CMA, then you're going to provide what you're going to provide for them, but you're also going to get them to sign off on the fact that you've educated them and provided them with the facts that it's not going to work. You can't be afraid to train the client, you know, because they don't know. They really don't. Right, there you go. Exactly. Just in the case of that medical building that I was telling you about, I didn't want to deal with that issue. I did not bid the contract. I walked away from it. It could have been a great contract, you know, because it was all sidewalk, ice melter, plowing, this, that, and everything else, but I didn't want the liability. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the day.